We're here today to discuss recent legislation that my office drafted, which would create the New York State Textbook Commission. The legislation is Assembly Bill number 9057, and because we just recently received this back, the printed version, we do not yet have a Senate co-sponsor, but we are actually actively seeking one at this time. Let me first tell you about the bill. As I previously said, the legislation creates a 13-member commission whose sole responsibility is to review and approve textbooks used in New York State that are free of any slanted bias towards any particular religion and is factually accurate with regards to the history of racial and ethnic minorities here in our country. The commission's makeup is comprised of 2 members appointed by the governor, 1 member appointed by the president of the Senate, 1 member appointed by the Speaker of the Assembly, 1 member appointed by the minority leader of both the Senate and the Assembly, respectively. 3 members appointed by the New York State United Teachers Federation, each of whom must be a classroom teacher. 1 member appointed by the School Administrators Association of New York. 1 member appointed by the President of the New York State Parent-Teacher Association. 1 member appointed by the Executive Director of the New York State Council for School Superintendents. And lastly, 1 member appointed by the President of the New York State School Boards Association. The Commission shall meet quarterly and is charged with the responsibility to perform a thorough and timely review of all assigned textbooks used here in New York State. At the conclusion of its review, the Commission shall prepare a list of at least 4 books in each subject and grades for which textbooks are to be adopted. Under this legislation, no teacher, principal, or instructional aide shall use any supplemental textbook or instructional materials that have not been approved by the Commission or granted a waiver. That is the legislation. Now, you might ask, is there a need for this commission? And let me state there is always a need to ensure that the textbooks that our children are using and learning from is free of any slanted bias towards any particular religion, and just as important, that the textbooks are factually accurate with regards to the country's history with regards to minorities. Every day we should take every measure possible to ensure that textbooks and instructional materials used in elementary classrooms are not wrongly promoting any particular political or social agenda or providing any inaccurate account of our history as it relates to minorities. This commission will go a long way in guaranteeing that our kids are taught an accurate and unvarnished portrayal of not only how our country's history has unfolded, but also world history. That should be the goal of educating our children every single day. Here are 3 recent examples that I believe support the formation of this commission and highlight the need for it. In 2015, a McGraw-Hill history textbook called Slaves, Workers, and Immigrants, implying both compensation and voluntary participation in relocation. After the mistake was discovered by a student, no less, McGraw-Hill admitted the error and acknowledged that the wording presented a false perception of history as it relates to slaves who were brought to America without compensation and without their consent and forced to work without compensation. The second example is a recent lawsuit filed in Maryland where a school district was sued for using textbooks and classroom assignments that had a pro-Islamic slant, including requiring students to write out both the Islamic creed that states there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, as well as the 5 pillars of Islam. The lawsuit also references textbooks that contain incomplete and deceptive accounts of Muslim history, which is alleged in the lawsuit to promote Islam as a religion. Lastly, Scholastic Inc. published a book called The Happy Slave, which is a slave narrative that wrongly associates positive feelings with regards to stories of slavery. The book was recommended for reading by the Children's Book Council and was used by schools as reading material. Those are 3 just quick examples for the need of such a commission. An excerpt from the 2015 article in The Atlantic discussing high school textbooks following the McGraw-Hill era states this: a national clearinghouse on history education research brief on 4 popular elementary and middle school textbooks concluded that the materials left out or misordered the cause and consequence of historical events and frequently failed to highlight main ideas. The article goes on to state that the flaws can be much more egregious than isolated errors, disorganization, or lack of clarity. Sometimes they're fundamental distortions of the context leading up to many of today's most dire social ills. Based upon all this, I believe there is a real possibility that we are failing our kids by not ensuring that the textbooks being used here in New York State are the best materials to educate them. The creation of this commission will ensure that all students are using the best textbooks that contain unslanted and factually correct information. Now, there may be some that say that this legislation is a solution in search of a problem. I would disagree. In addition to the textbook examples that I previously discussed, there are several recent examples where educational institutions here in New York State has engaged in actions that have resulted in the promotion of a particular religion over another with young students. Specifically, in 2015, a school district in Ithaca, New York, had a guest speaker for a third grade who spoke in pro-Palestinian and anti-Israeli terms. At the end of his presentation, the speaker called for the third graders to become freedom fighters for Palestine. The school district has since stated that the presentation was not developmentally appropriate for third graders, and the statements were politically skewed, inflammatory, and not endorsed by the school district. In Rochester, female students were instructed to wear Islamic hijab for a day. In February of 2016, an anti-Semitic educational video was shown in 3 ninth grade social study classes at Clarkstown South High School. The cartoon video, distributed by Study.com and approved by the district, was shown as part of a history lesson on Judaism and Christianity, explaining why Jews were persecuted under the Roman Empire. The video goes on to inaccurately describe Jews as violent, religious extremists, and that the Jewish people got what they deserved. With these 3 examples, there is at least the foundation to believe that there exists an atmosphere in the educational field to either consciously or unconsciously promote one religion over another. And we can't allow that. And this commission will ensure that our textbooks are free of that bias. I have with me today Cindy Gross, author of the book Rubber Room Romance, Everything You Need to Know and Ask About the Education System, and the United States Northeast Coordinator for Proclaiming Justice to Nations, to speak on this legislation. Mrs. Gross.